I am Ash Dykes. I'm an adventurer, extreme athlete, explorer, 3-time world first record holder, author and speaker. For the past sort of 10, 11 years, I've been taking on different adventures around different parts of the world. Some quite reckless ones, you know, machete in hand, sort of hacking through the jungle, crossing borders illegally, learning how to survive with the Burmese hill tribe. And then some which were records, you know, the first one being my Mongolia expedition, first person to walk the entire length of Mongolia, completely solo, completely unsupported. Second one was to walk the entire length of Madagascar, south to north, via the interior, sort of summiting the 8 highest mountains along the way. And most recently was Mission Yangtze, the 3rd longest river in the world, a Guinness World Record to become the first person to walk its entire length. 4,000 miles, and it took me 352 days to complete. Man, the training is intense. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it, straight up. I choose an adventure or an expedition based on how familiar I am with the country where I'm looking to do the adventure in. So I'm always looking first and foremost to get off the beaten track. You know, yes, it's a big world, there's still lots to explore, and people always sort of find themselves on the same track as everyone else. And especially when I was 19, traveling around sort of Southeast Asia, it was a very heavily traveled route, and it was all about getting off there, off that beaten track, and coming across the locals to explore the local way of life, really. The extremes played a huge part. I wanted to go somewhere which was extreme in terms of diversity, in terms of terrain, and in terms of weather systems.
When you're announcing that you're going to be taking on an expedition, how do people react around you?
Yeah, you know, it's always a funny one when I announce something, because it's run past close friends and family first. Not sort of run past to get their approval, but, you know, I sort of tested the idea on them. This is what I'm planning and preparing for. And earlier on, you know, my family and friends were pretty concerned. They were pretty worried, you know, what are you doing? What are you thinking? Yeah, but I think they kind of grown used to the crazy adventures that I was taking on, and was just like, typical, you know, we knew you'd be doing something else which was even bigger, even better next time round. And so when I then announced it, you know, via sort of global media, there were lots of pros to it, you know, lots of different sort of support came through, lots of brands wanted to team up.
And heaps on more pressure, maybe.
And the pressure, I've shouted about it, I now have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the motivation when I'm out there on an expedition. I can't quit, I can't come back, be tapped on the shoulder, oh, you tried your best. I can't have that, I have to complete it. And I'm a man of my word. I said I'd complete it, and that's what I intend to do.
To yourself or anyone else, do you feel as though you've got something to prove?
No. I think possibly earlier on, when I was 19, 20, I had something to prove to myself. You know, I would watch documentaries, I'd hear stories, and I would always be curious as to see if I had what it takes to complete these sort of journeys, whether that's jungle, in the mountains, in the desert, you know, and to see how I handle certain situations, whether that be sort of dangerous, life-threatening. And so I was always looking to push myself and test myself. But I would say a huge part of it, probably 80 to 90% of it, is the curiosity. I'm curious about meeting and learning from new people. You know, I don't have a military background, I never went to university, so all of the sort of survival that I've learned, and the things in general that I've learned about life, has come from people that I've met on my travels, and tribal communities taking me under their wing and showing me the ways of how to survive and get back, you know, through these harsh environments that they live in. So the curiosity is a huge part of it.
Yeah, and it's an education that you're probably almost unique in experiencing.
Yeah, and from a young age, I always found that I was very much a kinesthetic learner, learning through hands-on practical experience. I would doze off in the classroom, some people learn through being told, or through reading books or through watching something. For me, it's definitely through experiencing something. And even if someone warns me, of a mistake I might make, I won't really learn the lesson until I've made that mistake myself, which it's always kind of been that way.
In Mission Yangtze particularly, I think it was at the start, you spoke about bears and wolves being sort of ever present. How on earth do you sleep in a tent knowing that you've got these things outside?
Well, part of it is that you are exhausted from walking 50 kilometers with a 30 kilogram rucksack. You just crash. But no, on the real part, it is terrifying. I kind of went out to China with the healthy sort of Western mindset of, you leave the bears alone and they'll leave you alone. But the locals were telling and showing me otherwise. They were saying that it doesn't work like that around here. The Tibetan locals are killed all the time via bear attacks. And it usually happens when the local strolls upon a bear, and surprises the bear. And of course the bear is forced to attack through defense. You've shocked the bear. And so I was like, okay, that's fine. I just need to make loud noises, blow the whistle, be loud, be rowdy, and the bears will know that I'm coming and will probably run away. But then there's a specific time called, pretty much before they go into hibernation, it's called the torpor season. And that's this season, bear hunting season, where they come off from the mountains because it gets too cold and they actively search for calories before they go into hibernation. You don't want to be trekking in those months, but of course, I was trekking in those months, and they were actively looking for food, for calories. They would go into communities, they would rip down huts, they would, kill families. They would scratch at steel doors, and so a tent didn't offer much protection at all. So many nights were fairly sleepless.
Following on from that, after a grueling day of hiking, from a mindset perspective, how do you prepare yourself to do it all again tomorrow?
I think that comes in the mental preparation that you do prior to the expedition. It's almost all done here back at home. I do find, so a lot of people kind of see these expeditions potentially as sort of daredevil, or, you must have a death wish, but it's really not the case. And I think that's one of the main reasons why, for example, my parents are so content with me going off on these expeditions time and time again, is because they see the meticulous planning, they see the attention to detail, they see how much I prepare. I'm sort of studying and researching every little obstacle on the map, and through meeting people who know the country far better than myself, and trying to learn and understand each of the challenges or obstacles that could come up, and then do my study of how I can possibly overcome those challenges. And so when I go out on one of these expeditions, I'm very much well prepared in terms of what can go wrong and what I'm going to face. And that includes a hard day of blisters, rubs, dehydration, being hungry, and then going to sleep knowing that I've got that again. It's a case of no sort of tapping myself on the back feeling sorry for myself. It's a case of I planned for this, I prepared for this, I knew this could happen, I visualized for this, so get up and crack on, and that's what I do. Nothing compares, you can do all of the sort of mental and physical preparation in a gym, or not even in the gym, in the mountains, running up the mountains, a rucksack on you, out in the snow, out in the hardcore elements, but nothing will hit you hard than when you face a tough scenario out in the wilderness, when you're at your most vulnerable and have no one there to help make a decision, no one there to help motivate you. And you're going to be in a far worse state on an expedition than you are here. I faced it many times before, where I've been back home and shelter, cup of tea, food in my belly, feeling warm, feeling dry, and I'm positive. I'm like, yeah, nothing's going to stop me. And then when I'm out there, it's a whole different ball game. And I think many people who have joined me on the expeditions have very much realised that it's a lot harsher than the photos show on the Instagram. It's that harsh reality of actually this is pretty grim. So there's no real way to prepare other than experience. And so that's very important. What I've done since I was 19, I always started doing these adventures, sort of building on slower and slower, you know, making them bigger each time, facing sleep deprivation, facing starvation, facing dehydration, the niggles and, you know, bites from spiders, you name it. And that is all great experience. Doesn't sound great, but in the long run, it's great experience to help to prepare you of how you're going to handle these similar scenarios on the next project, if that makes sense. But the preparation that I do here, in terms of how you ask, you know, how do you prepare mentally fully? And my answer is you can't really prepare fully mentally, but what you can do is picture worst case scenario. And that's something I've always done, even from Mongolia days. If there's going to be wolves, expect to be attacked. If there's going to be blizzards, expect there to be the biggest and baddest blizzards. Not because you want to face the biggest blizzards, because of course you don't, but if you're picturing absolutely everything that can go wrong, you can even dramatize it, but if you're picturing everything that goes wrong, if it does unfortunately happen when you're out there, then it doesn't come as a shock or a surprise, it comes as something you expected. So now you must just tackle it.
Is it one of the appeals that you almost become like a primal ash? You're vulnerable to the elements, to animals. Is that one of the appeals of the adventures?
I think that's a big appeal of it, yeah. I think, you know, I'm a big believer of you never really know what you're about or who you are unless you've truly, well and truly been pushed to certain limits where you've been forced to understand who you are and what you're about and what you're made of. And, like, you know, we all have weaknesses and we all have strengths. We all face vulnerabilities. There hasn't been one expedition where I've not been scared. You know, I've been terrified on all of these expeditions. I'm no superhuman, you know, I've been injured, I've caught diseases, I've been held up at gunpoint, I've faced and crossed crocodile-infested rivers, I've been followed by a pack of wolves. Each and every one of these examples, I have been terrified. But again, it's the difference between fight or flight. It's the difference between, you know, calling in and quitting the expedition or pushing on. And I guess I was always curious to see what kind of character I was. And I think we can always be built up to that character that does push on. But there's certain ways to do that. And I think you've got to do it via experience. Can't be ill-prepared or ill-experienced and then do something like the Yangtze. I think if I tried to do the Yangtze for the first adventure, I would have died. You know, I needed all of the previous sort of backtrack of expeditions to be able to complete that one.
Dehydration is a different beast altogether.
Yeah.
How was your decision making affected in the Gobi Desert?
I was lucky to get out of the Gobi Desert. Yeah, it was. I was in an awful way. You know, let alone the fact that the trailer that I was pulling behind me, it was sort of carrying all of the provisions that I needed to survive. Not only survive the 5 weeks that it would take to walk across the Gobi Desert, but also the 3 weeks over the Altai Mountains, and then the 3 weeks afterwards across the Mongolian steppe. So you're talking 2.5 months, or 2 months pretty much, of just high intense trekking with an 18-stone trailer. And by the point I got out of the Altai Mountains, I was already fairly dehydrated because it was a pretty cold environment. I didn't really think about drinking much water. I entered the Gobi Desert, and then it came to a point a couple of weeks later where the thin wheels were sinking into the soft sand. It felt like pulling a concrete block through hell. I was blistered, I was really skinny, I was delirious, I was hallucinating, I'm suffering with heat stroke at this point. I could feel my organs drying up, and one of the wells, which was an unconfirmed water source, but it was dry. And so that meant that I had to now ration my last remaining dribbles of water until I make it to the next well, which is a confirmed water source. But from then on, it would take me days and days. And at my worst point, I still had 4 days to go. And so, yeah, it skewed my decision making. But what I found, instead of sort of resting and, again, you know, feeling sorry for myself and thinking about my friends and my family and thinking, you know, if I die here, my body's just going to be a corpse that people might just drive on by, you know, who knows. I hadn't seen anyone in 8 days up to this point. But instead of thinking about that dark stuff, I was thinking more of, what can I do? How can I break my goals down to survive this? And that's exactly what I did. Big believer in, like, the law of attraction, visualization, couldn't visualize 4 days, not in that pain and that state that I was in, but I could visualize 100 meters. You know, I could see 100 meters. If I can get up from out of my trailer, which was the only shelter I had, drink no more than a few droplets of water, push on 100 meters, if I can manage that, rest for no more than 5 minutes, and then repeat that process over and over again, then I've got to make that next water source. And that's what I did over the next 4 days, and just about made it. I was in a bad way. There were locals there. It took me 8 days to recover. But I did recover enough to be able to push on again, but yeah, escaped with my life.
Yeah, I mean, a near-death experience like that, and even visualising yourself as a corpse at the side of the road, that's not normal for people to go through, especially at that age. How have you changed as a person from Ash before the 3 world record breaking expeditions to who you are today?
I've always stocked up on water ever since. I've always been taking and making sure. That's why I followed a damn river, following the Yangtze River. There's no way I'm getting dehydrated, otherwise I'm definitely lost. You know, many of these different sort of near-death scenarios and situations have changed me in many ways, all for the better. You know, I believe that I needed to face the dehydration of the Gobi Desert to respect how damaging the sun and the heat can be, and the lack of water for any future expeditions I take on. It also taught me a lesson of not to rush. You know, I was very much trying to smash out as much mileage as I could, which is fine if you're doing something locally. You want to get up the miles, or, you know, smash a time or whatever. But when you're out there in those hardcore elements being blasted by snow blizzards or sandstorms, it's not the time and place to be pushing yourself any more than you already are, you know. And so I learned to take my time, you know, one day at a time, and learn a little bit more about myself and how I handle scenarios like that. But because before I attempted Mongolia, you know, I was shit scared of many things. I had never done anything this big before. It's my first expedition, and it was my first world first. You know, all of the previous adventures had been with a friend who set off traveling with me when we were 19, and so I didn't know how I would handle the loneliness, how I would handle the vulnerability. Would I call in quit? It would have been fully acceptable if I did call in and say, look, I'm done. But I just didn't know what kind of, you know, how I would handle that situation. So I learned a lot about myself through that situation and that particular journey.
Okay, so let's talk about training. How can you possibly physically train for these crazy expeditions? Man, the training is intense. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it, straight up. But the training, effectively I'm not training to prepare only physically, but I'm training to prepare my mindset too. I'm preparing myself mentally. And when I came back, so I was living in Thailand, I was a scuba diving instructor, I was a Muay Thai fighter. I came back from Thailand, I moved back in with my parents in Wales. I was 22. I had no more than £100 or £200 to my name. I couldn't afford no gym membership, yet I was planning to attempt a world first. I didn't even have the green light to make this expedition go ahead because I couldn't even afford the flight out to Mongolia, let alone the whole journey itself. And so what I did is, once I realised and started working on funds to make Mongolia happen, I was minimising funds all round, and it worked out that I couldn't actually afford gym membership. And so effectively I had to train from home. You know, I've got garden space, I had a garage, and I thought if I can use the garage and get free weights, you know, I can train in the garage. And then my uncle ended up dropping me off a tractor tyre and a sledgehammer. So I had a tractor tyre, a sledgehammer, I had a bar, I had free weights, I had a weighted vest dropped off. And effectively I created such a savage routine in my garage and garden. You know, it was winter time as well, so it was snowing. It didn't matter. I was still out there at, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, flipping the tyre, beating it with a sledgehammer, applying the weighted vest, doing pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, you name it, going for runs, going for cycles with a weighted rucksack. And effectively what I was doing is I was trying to make myself as durable as possible, especially with Mongolia and pulling the weighted trailer behind me. I knew that I needed to be, agile enough but durable for when the trailer rips my waist from side to side. I need to be able to, handle that impact for the full
1,500 miles. And whilst I was doing this and preparing physically, it took me 3 hours a day. The training routine was 3 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week, for the 4-5 month build up to take on Mongolia. But I was also preparing mentally, because as I'm out there in the snow, in the mountains, I'm thinking of worst case scenario that I'm going to face on the Mongolia and what it's going to be like when I'm at my absolute lowest point. And so I think this hand in hand, although it didn't prepare me enough to just, go out there and handle it with ease, it did prepare me enough to, see me through the whole expedition. I believe that comes down to good preparation. Some people might call it luck, but it comes down to what I believe good preparation and training and planning and being ready physically and mentally.
For people who see the highlights, see you holding up the Welsh flag at the end of an expedition, that looks great, and you'd hope that it does inspire people to go on their own adventures, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
But not to put people off, but maybe as a reality check, what difficulty have you found consistent to every expedition you've been on?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say the hardest part about any expedition, both the planning and being on the journey itself, is despite the challenges and obstacles you face, you've got to keep pushing on. And I think a lot of people have, I think they have a winner's mentality, but I think in all of us, there's that 10% of quit or turn around. And too often people flip towards that 10% of let's just stop here. And I think the important factor with me with all of the expeditions is I continued to plan even if I didn't have money. I continued to plan even if I didn't have visas or permits. I would say it's the persistence of just that dogged, stubborn mentality of whatever it is you're after, whatever it is you want. You're going to have the naysayers, you're going to have the people who say it's impossible. It's great what they think, but what's really important is what you think. And if you believe you can do it, and if you plan well enough, then understand that there will be knockbacks, there will be setbacks with every expedition. So malaria is a perfect example. I managed to reach a doctor 3 hours before I potentially slipped into a coma and losing my life. I could have just stopped in the jungle. I could have let the tiredness sink in, because I was delirious. I was all over the place. I just wanted to sleep, but my mind was saying, get up, keep pushing, because this is something you've got. Didn't know it was malaria. But if I had given up or just decided to sleep under that tree for a few hours, I never would have made it. Mm-hmm. So I think with everything, with these expeditions, it's that dogged mentality to just keep fucking going. Yeah. And I think that's a message that we can all relate to in life. It doesn't have to be out in the desert. It doesn't have to be hacking through the jungle, suffering with malaria. It doesn't have to be summiting mountains, being followed by bears. Not many people are gonna do that, and I don't necessarily encourage that. But what I hope that people take from these stories is substance that they can relate to. It's things that they can take from the lessons I've learned and apply it to their everyday life. Because that's exactly what I do, and it really helps to put things into perspective when I'm back here in the UK. A little example, if I have to do a U-turn in a car because I missed the turning, I won't flip out as much as I used to, because in Madagascar I missed a turning and had to walk 3 days back on myself. So it puts things into perspective, and especially with the breaking down your goals like I did in the Gobi Desert to save my life, or in the jungles of Madagascar, realizing that whatever you face in life, you can't always be motivated, but you can be disciplined. I think all of these messages are what we can all relate to and apply to our everyday life.
Mm-hmm. So if someone's taken that on board and they're prepared to never quit and just keep going, having that dogged mentality, what would be the first step that you'd advise someone takes to start planning an expedition or an adventure?
To just literally start planning. Two things actually. One is get planning, don't delay it. The second, if you've got a plan and it's an exciting plan, and then you sort of tell yourself, I'll start planning that tomorrow, chances are that excitement's gone, that fuse has died, and the next day you'll be thinking of other ideas, or you'll be thinking about the cons, so it'll put you off. I say whatever you've got ideas-wise is get on the case almost instantly is one thing. And then the other thing is don't overplan. I feel there's so many people that overplan and sort of bore themselves to death, you know, or look at... So if you look at my earlier expeditions and adventures, for example, me and my friend Matt, we were chilling in Cambodia on the Mekong riverbank, and we came up with the idea, let's cycle Cambodia and Vietnam. We're on a low budget. You know, we've got £10 to spare on a bicycle. So we bought 2 bicycles. The next day we left to cycle the entire length of Cambodia and Vietnam. We had a basket on the front, we purchased a loaf of bread, peanut butter. We didn't even have no puncture repair kit, we didn't have a pump, we didn't have gears, we didn't have suspension, no helmet, no reflective gear. Very reckless, very dangerous, I don't recommend. But we did it. The next day we left. We had an idea and the next day we were on it and made it happen. Whereas if we sat back and started looking at the best sort of aerodynamic equipment and the most expensive lush bike that we can find, and it would have added up, the budget would have built up and we would have been like, nah, let's just get the bus. You know, that's the difference, is people can just overplan sometimes.
So your experiences in the last few years, one of which was appearing on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Yes, it was awesome, mate. It was really cool. You know, it was an email that came through 2 weeks before I was on the show, pretty much 2 weeks to get yourself ready, fly to LA and you can be on the Joe Rogan podcast. And it was around Christmas time and I was like, yeah, you know, when an opportunity like that comes through, you don't hang about. And so, yeah, flight's booked. I flew out there. His whole team were awesome. He showed me around the whole studio, proper man cave, which is mega. And then he was just as cool off podcast as he was on. You know, we were chatting for a while beforehand, chatting afterwards as well. He messaged the next day saying he bumped in, well, the day after the podcast launched, saying he bumped into a group outside a restaurant, him and his wife, and that they were banging on about the episode. And I was like, that's so cool for him to reach out and let me know that feedback as well. Quality time, yeah, loved it.
Muay Thai, yeah, on my channel, a lot of it is to do with combat sports. You have competed in Thailand. Can you just talk me through what that was?
Oh God, I loved Muay Thai. I still got a passion for it. I'd love to start it back up. So my background initially was here in Wales. I was a boxer, so I was doing a lot of boxing. I went out to Thailand at age 19, went to Bangkok, saw a major stadium fight in the centre of Bangkok with all of the music, with the traditions, and I fell in love with it straight away and how brutal it was. I then started up Muay Thai only 2 years later when I lived there as a scuba diving instructor, and got my leg jacked up a number of times because I was in the boxing stance, you know, and they just target my leg off, you know, down I was. But then, you know, once I really started to take on proper Muay Thai lessons, and what I loved most about it was actually integrating myself with the locals. You know, they would sleep at the gym, they would wake up, have breakfast at the gym, train 3-4 times a day. They'd be running around the island in their sauna suits in like 35 degrees Celsius. I loved their discipline, I loved their motivation. They, you know, would drill me through certain techniques to help me improve with the Muay Thai. I'd kill the nerve endings of my shins, especially leading up to a fight. I'd be there at night with a book or whether it like a stick, you know, smashing my shins. And I loved the atmosphere, and it is brutal. It is all round. I actually lost size. I became a lot skinnier, but I was so much stronger then than I was beforehand, where I was just doing a lot of weights, you know. It felt like my whole body was in sync. The lower part was in sync with my upper part. And again, it's one of those martial arts that focuses on all components, so I loved it.
I know the official announcement isn't coming yet, but can you give a tease of what is next for Dykes?
Yeah, so, you know, it's been very difficult to plan an expedition because of the pandemic, but me and my team have been working hard. We've got something exciting coming. I can't give you much of what it is and where or when, but I can say it's not a sort of year-long world first record. It's slightly different. It's been filmed, this one as well. It's 6 to 8 weeks, not necessarily hiking, a little bit of everything, and I think it's going to be mega.